The man at my gate pointed a gun at my daughter and grinned like he owned the block, like he'd been deputized by every lawn sign and mailbox in Maple Ridge Estates. I could hear my own heartbeat clog my ears, slow and thick, and in that frozen second I realized this wasn't about rules or trash cans or siding colors anymore. It was about who gets to decide what a neighborhood is and how far someone will go when no one calls them out. My name is Maggie Cole, and if you'd told me 12 months earlier that I'd be standing on my own porch arguing with an imposter over who had the right to walk down a sidewalk, I would have laughed and poured another glass of wine. That was before things escalated, before the fines, the forged minutes, the little signs that said community standards enforced that meant something else to the people who liked power. Maple Ridge looks like every small-town subdivision postcard: wide streets, maple trees in the fall, porches where people wave if they've got time and aren't in a hurry. I moved here because I wanted normal after a long stretch of moving and paperwork and living out of suitcases. My house is nothing special. Blue siding, a crooked mailbox that the HOA never liked, a swing on the back porch that used to be my grandmother's. I felt safe. That's the thing. Safety is the quiet contract you make with everyone around you. And when people break the small rules of decency, it doesn't always leave bruises you can see. It leaves you looking over your shoulder. Evelyn Pratt showed up like she was the plot twist in a bad novel. She was appointed secretary of the HOA board the month after I moved in, with a smile that never reached the eyes and a clipboard that seemed permanently glued to her hand. At first it was little things, a note about the paint on our mailbox, too rustic, a demand to plant a certain hedge, because reasons, the kind of small tyrannies that wear you down slow. Evelyn loved rules the way some people love church hymns. She loved them more when other people obeyed them. If power were a perfume, she wore it heavy. And although she had the civic title, she had two things even more dangerous than a clipboard: a following and a man who liked to look like a cop. Ralph Turner was a burly guy with a shaved head and an easy way of walking into someone's yard like he'd paid rent on it. He wore a vest that said Community Patrol, no badge, no authority, and he liked to bark orders. He was the muscle behind Evelyn's meetings, the reason neighbors who might otherwise speak up closed their doors and watched from curtains. He liked to humiliate people into silence, and he liked cameras when it suited him and darkness when it didn't. Over months, Ralph became the physical manifestation of the HOA's teeth. Nowhere in the Articles of Incorporation did it say, you can pull a gun and threaten a neighbor, but then nowhere did it say you shouldn't either, until you crossed a line so obvious even the people who lie to themselves about right and wrong have to blink. My daughter Claire kept things private. She'd always been private, quiet as a stone, and sharp as one too. Claire was 32, raised on collapse and comfort. Military school for a while, then years where I only saw postcards and short calls. A woman who learned to carry the world without asking anyone to carry her. She moved back in for a while after a job change, because that's what we do for family. She worked odd hours and never talked much about what she did. She was careful with who she trusted, and I admired that in her. I also worried about it. Moms do. When the first notice about the mailbox came, I laughed it off. That was easy. Then the fines started, small amounts that looked like someone testing the water. People talk about gaslighting in relationships, and I think that's what the HOA practiced. A slow erasure of your confidence until you second-guess whether your lawn is crooked or your head is. They called meetings and waved minutes around that had signatures that looked like they'd been traced from other documents. They posted rules that had no legal teeth, but had social ones: the power to embarrass, to shame, to make neighbors gossip. Evelyn was good at the theater of authority. She knew how to make a neighborhood obey. I tried to handle it the way I always had, calm, organized, a letter here and there. The first time I went to a meeting, I learned the rules of engagement for these modern little wars. Speak too loudly, and the room turns. Ask for evidence, and you get the paper shuffle. Ask for a vote, and they'll talk until the sun goes down. Evelyn smiled and read from a page as if she wrote it herself. Ralph stood at the back like a portrait of inevitability. A woman named Denise, she'd lived here 20 years and now attended every meeting like a devoted extra, made it worse by nodding big and looking pleased when someone was scolded. There are people who cheer when others fall, and a small community gives them the stage. The tension ratcheted up over months. Lawn ornaments went missing on my street, not stolen, I later learned, but reassigned for the sake of community aesthetics. Yard signs disappeared. Fines arrived for things we didn't do. The HOA's bank record I later saw sure enough. Money routed to a P.O. box linked to someone's side projects. It was petty, it was cruel, and it had a smell of something more than just pride in the neighborhood. It had the smell of control. People who feel small will often compensate by making others smaller. That's the simplest human cruelty. One evening in early May, Claire called me. Her voice that day was clipped, a tone I hadn't heard from her since she was a teenager late for curfew. "Mom," she said, "there's a man on the driveway and he's telling me to put the car keys in the mailbox." I remember thinking it was ridiculous until I heard the background, the low mutter of someone speaking too loud for a polite neighbor. "Who?" I asked, my own voice already moving like a car faster than my brain. "Is he armed?" "Call the police." "No, Claire's voice went small. "He says he's enforcing the community rules. He wants the keys because my car is in violation." Her laugh at the end was a hollow sound. "Mom, he has a gun." My drive home is a memory of traffic lights and a shifting knot in my throat. People drive like nothing's wrong when nothing's wrong. They turn into joints of normality that refuse to give way for urgency. I pulled into my driveway and saw a cluster of neighbors on our street like a set piece phones up, eyes wide. Ralph was on my lawn with his community patrol vest and a handgun in a holster that looked like it belonged on a real officer. He wore a grin like a prize. "Ma'am," he said to me when I stepped onto the porch, "we are enforcing community standards." It's important to say this plainly. When a man points a gun at someone who's not a criminal, the legalities fall away under the weight of the human fact. Justice is supposed to be procedural, a search warrant, a court order, not a man with a temper. But that's the thing. Ralph wanted attention. He wanted the performance of authority. He wanted to be seen as the line between order and chaos, even if he was creating both. He moved like a man who'd rehearsed a role too many times. Claire stood behind him, hands visible, palms out like someone trying to make their body speak for them. Ralph had his hand on the holster, but not on the gun yet. He spoke loudly, and neighbors watched, silent. Evelyn read the bylaws like scripture behind him. "Your vehicle violates Section 7.4, she intoned. "We need compliance now. You don't get to take someone's property," I said, my voice thin. "You are not law enforcement. You have no right to—" "That's not true," Ralph interrupted, the kind of interruption that is meant to shut a room. "We've been granted community oversight. We have the right to enforce." He nodded to Evelyn like she'd scored a point. A man across the street filmed it on his phone. His thumb trembled. It's funny, well, not funny how scenes in real life take on a cinematic quality. The light was low, the sky like an old photograph, the maple leaves moving like a backdrop. Claire didn't look young or scared. She looked composed in a way that made me trust the ground under us. She said, "Quiet. You're not authorized to seize property. If you try, I'm calling the police." Ralph laughed. That little bark was the sound that will still echo in my head on bad nights. "Call them then," he said. "See who answers." He reached for the gun without warning, and that's when someone screamed. Hands moved. Phones recorded. That reached the world compressed to a fingertip. What happened next, I can describe the way one describes lightning. Quick, dangerous, impossible to rehearse. Claire stepped forward, faster than I thought possible, and in a smooth motion practiced and precise, she knocked Ralph's hand aside and pushed the gun down to the grass. The sound of metal hitting ground was like a punctuation. There was a beat when everyone realized he'd been disarmed, not wounded, not shot, simply disarmed, and then Ralph lunged as if he forgot what protocol was, as if his role didn't allow for humiliation. Claire moved again. She took a step and planted herself between Ralph and me and said, cool as a winter morning, "Back up. Hands up." She spoke like a woman trained to issue commands that people obey. The street held its breath. Evelyn sputtered about trespass and bylaws. Denise started to cry into her hands. The man filming had a shaky smile that said this was better television than he expected. When the sheriff's deputy finally arrived, which was an eternity in minutes, the scene cracked open like an overripe fruit. Statements were taken. Ralph explained himself like a man who thought he could talk his way into authority. Claire produced a small ID wallet and an agency badge that looked official enough to stop anyone's mouth mid-sentence. A world shifted on its hinges when she said in the same calm voice, "I'm a federal agent. I'm on temporary leave and home for a bit. You can handle your grievances in court, but you do not point firearms at civilians. I remember how the neighbors' faces melted not all at once, but in fragments. Relief, confusion, the dawning shame of realizing they stood by while a private tyrant flexed. Even Evelyn's shoulders lowered, the muscles relaxing out of posture. But the change didn't mean everything would be neat. Authority in the hands of the small-minded leaves a mess. After the deputy took Ralph aside and put him in the back of the cruiser, the footage that had been captured on phones started to go around the neighborhood like a current. People watched their own behavior and winced. I sat on the porch steps and watched Claire as if I'd never really seen her before. This version of her, who could move through a violent moment with a surgeon's precision and a mother's instinct. We didn't talk much at first. We didn't need to. The silence had the shape of understanding. The days after were a blur of interviews, statements, and frantic emails. The HOA could no longer hide behind its small rules because now the world had a tape. Evidence moved faster than their denial. When I finally requested to see the HOA's minutes and the bank records, the things Evelyn kept guarded like a jeweler's safe, the documents told a story. There were odd transfers to shell companies. Bylaws had been amended without quorum. Minutes bore signatures that didn't match records. These weren't mistakes. They were a system designed to look like civic action but operate like a private fiefdom. That's the part you don't see in the movies. Paper is deadly. People underestimate the power of a forged line on a ledger. If you can create a paper trail, you can make a history. Evelyn loved history. She loved to frame things as tradition. Tradition is a comfortable cloak for corruption because people are taught to respect it rather than question it. But the more I looked, the more I found the veneer chipping to show the rot. When you investigate a small power structure, you find everything it needs to keep itself small and quietly profitable. There were consequences. Ralph was charged with unlawful possession and intimidation. His little community patrol turned out to be a performance for which the county didn't grant an encore. Evelyn faced charges for forging documents and misuse of HOA funds. Denise, the neighbor who had enjoyed the spectacle, gave a depositions that read like someone trying to be honest after years of being complicit. People who had turned their heads had to answer for the parts they'd played. Truthfully, even justice is messy. Evelyn's supporters claimed she was being bullied, that homeowners were overreacting. They posted on neighborhood threads and framed Claire as an interloper. Online, stories twist. There were op-eds from retired small-town officials about community standards being under siege. But the legal system has a rhythm. It required evidence and procedure, and it turns out in small towns witnesses. We had both. The videos were key, a dozen angles of the same lie unspooling. In court, the tapes were less flashy than social media had made them. They were simply plain facts. A city official testified to the mismatch in filings. A bank clerk explained the transfers. A forensic handwriting analyst compared the signatures. It's a slow mechanical justice, not the sweeping justice of movies. But for the people who'd been harassed and fined and shamed, it felt like a beginning. Even so, the aftermath left scars that no charge could erase. People who had been cowed didn't suddenly become brave. Those who'd been loud didn't always admit they were wrong. Some neighbors refused to speak to us ever again. There were threats lobbed at our mailbox, anonymous notes testing the lines. Claire and I changed our routines for a while, because even when law catches up with the bully, people's fury lingers like a bad smell. But something else happened too, a strange unburdening. Neighbors who'd been silent found their voices. A man named Omar, who lived 3 doors down, finally brought his barbecue out of the garage and started a weekly cookout where people could air grievances and also laugh. A woman named Tasha started a neighborhood committee that actually did what it said on the label. They drafted clear bylaws, transparent budgets, and posted minutes like they were proud of them. You'd think democracy in a cul-de-sac would be unsexy. You'd be wrong. It's messy work, and it's beautiful when people do it because they want to belong. Claire handled the legal fallout the way she handles everything, with precision and low-key grace. She volunteered to give testimony where she could, but she didn't want to be a spectacle. She wanted to be a person who did a job and went home. The county offered her a chance to testify to the Community Standards Committee about the danger of private men with holsters and the difference between civic responsibility and humiliation. She spoke without grandstanding and with a clarity that made everyone sit up straight. Authority is a responsibility, she said, not a costume. It was not the kind of line that went viral, and that was the point. It was the sort of sentence that fixes a thing quietly, without fanfare. Months passed. The HOA was reorganized under state oversight while the legal process unfolded. There were new rules that required independent audits and public meetings with recorded minutes and real ballots sent in the mail, not crowdsourced petitions. It was tedious and it was necessary. Some people left. Some of those who left after apologizing. Some never apologized at all. We planted a maple tree by the sidewalk, a small thing, but when its leaves turned in the autumn, I felt like something inside me turned too. I want to be honest about the cost. My sense of safety was a casualty. There were nights I woke up and walked the house, checking locks and windows the way some people check prayer beads. There were times a car would slow on our street, and my muscles would coil, and I'd remember Ralph's grin. But that fear also sharpened the parts of me that are stubborn and human. I became someone who could scan a neighborhood and see both kindness and the potential for cruelty. That's not a bad skill to have. It's human. One of the things people asked me after it all was whether I'd do anything differently. I can't say I would, because Claire's decision in that moment to step forward and disarm a man with a gun was not something I want anyone to emulate as a plan. I'm not a fan of violent heroics, but I am grateful for the way she moved and for the truth that came out after. If there's a lesson, maybe it's this. Systems built on secrecy and fear always hurt people, and when a community refuses to let that stand, sometimes the lie unravels. It takes courage to speak up and courage to listen. It's not glamorous. It's a lot of phone calls and paperwork and quiet apologies and awkward neighborhood meetings where someone brings potato salad and apologizes in front of everyone. We ended up having a block party that first summer with a little bit of triumph and a lot of normalness, kids on bikes that weren't mine, though I watched them like a hawk, because that's what mothers do. People brought pop-up tents and folding tables and enough pasta salad to sink a boat. Claire stood by the grill and didn't wear a badge. She was just my daughter then, laughing with neighbors who'd watched her stand in front of a gun and decide, without thinking about it, that her mother would not be threatened on her own porch. She told a joke about Ralph's dog, which lightened things, and the laugh that followed was real. Those moments are what we rebuild around. There was a hush in town when the court finally gave its verdicts. Legal consequences landed: fines, restitution, short jail time in some cases. Evelyn pleaded to lesser counts, an attempt to contain the story. Ralph got a sentence that would remind him that performance doesn't substitute for law. People on both sides had to reckon with the idea that community is not a stage for private theatrics. It's a shared life where your decisions touch other people in ways that matter. I thought about the months of small humiliations that led to the porch on that day. I thought about the ways people let institutions become a mask for character flaws. That's the sadness. Power often attracts people who enjoy imposing it. Yet it wasn't all justice or all redemption. There was a neighbor who never came back to the barbecues because the shame was too loud for him. There was a thread online where someone argued we'd gone too far, that we'd ruined a woman's life. There will always be those voices because people like clear narratives, villain and hero, and messy real life doesn't fold that way. To me, the story is layered. A mother who wanted a quiet life, a daughter whose training met a moment, a community that had to choose between enabling a bully and standing together. If you press me, I'd say it's a story about ordinary people learning to be citizens, not just residents. I want to tell you about one small scene that sticks with me. The day Claire and I walked down the street after everything had started to settle, the sun just right, the air with that early autumn crispness. We passed the spot where Ralph had stood. There was a child there, not ours, drawing with chalk. She drew a long line and stopped, looked up, and then scrawled the word home. Claire knelt down and asked her what she was drawing. The girl shrugged. Home, she said. It's where you feel safe. Claire smiled, and in that smile I saw the soft end of a long day. We keep making home out of ordinary acts, showing up for a neighbor, writing straight minutes, returning an empty mailbox. It's quiet work, but it builds something. I won't romanticize the experience. It was painful and costly, but I will say this. If you live in a town with an HOA, or on a street where one person seems to love the sound of their own instructions, you don't have to let it become a small hell. Speak up. Take photos. Keep records. Talk to neighbors. There's a line between civility and domination, and it's easier to step across than you'd think. The moments when we are most ordinary, when we show up with potato salad, when we write minutes plainly, When we keep receipts, those are the ways a community keeps itself honest. Before I close, I want to be clear. Authority exists to protect people, not to inflate egos. When someone dresses up like a guard and asserts power without accountability, call it out. When bylaws look like they were written in secret rooms and signatures don't match, demand transparency. And if someone pulls a gun on your porch, call the police, but also hold the system that enabled them accountable. It's unwieldy, and it's civic work, and it takes patience. It takes people who believe that kindness is a practice, not a passive state. I'll end with this. Neighborhoods are collections of small decisions. We decide whether we let fear guide our actions or whether we answer with patience and courage. We decide whether we'll support people who bully others or whether we'll stand with the person being bullied. I know which side I picked, and I'm proud of it, messy as it was. If you have a story like this or a question, I want to hear it. Tell me what you think. Was it justice or overreach? Did Claire act right? Did the community do enough? Drop a comment and tell us how you'd handle it. Share the video if you think someone in your neighborhood needs to hear this. And if you've got a story about standing up to an unjust small-town power, leave it below. Let's talk about what real community looks like.